The ocean doesn't ask permission before it takes you. McKenna felt the cold first. Not gradually, all at once, like her body had been slammed into a wall made of ice. Her lungs screamed, her arms clawed at the water, but it kept pulling her down, heavier than gravity, darker than anything she'd ever known. She couldn't tell which way was up. The storm didn't roar, it pressed. Rain slashed sideways. Waves collided from every direction, spinning her like she was nothing. Her dress wrapped around her legs, dragging her deeper. Every breath she managed to steal tasted like salt and panic. Then a hand locked around her waist. Callum. His grip was iron, desperate. He pulled her toward the surface, his other arm reaching for the orange emergency ring bobbing just a few feet away. McKenna gasped, coughing violently, her vision blurred by rain and seawater. She couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. But she was alive. For now. Then the scream cut through everything. Callum! Hi viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Callum's head snapped around. His entire body went rigid. Saffron. His wife was slipping under the surface, her blonde hair plastered against her face, her arms flailing wildly. Her expensive dress pulled her down like an anchor. She surfaced once, gasping, eyes wide with terror. Callum, please. Her voice cracked, raw, real. And then she screamed the words that changed everything. I'm pregnant. The world stopped. McKenna felt Callum's grip on her loosen. Not fully, but enough. Enough for her to understand what was happening. His breathing changed. His eyes darted between her and Saffron, wild and unfocused, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff with no good options. Saffron went under again. McKenna's heart pounded so hard it hurt. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The ocean kept pushing her down, but Callum's arm was still there, barely holding her above the surface. His face twisted with something worse than fear. Calculation. If you had to choose between saving a stranger or your family, what would you do? Don't scroll past this. McKenna saw it in his eyes. The war happening inside him. The impossible weight of a choice no one should ever have to make. His wife. A baby. Or the woman who worked in his house, who made his tea, who he barely knew but somehow understood better than anyone. The storm waited. Saffron surfaced one more time, choking, her hand clutching her stomach like it was the only thing that mattered. Please, she gasped, our baby. Callum's jaw clenched, his grip on McKenna tightened again. Then he made his choice. But the reason he made it wouldn't become clear until much, much later. And by then, everything would already be destroyed. 6 weeks earlier, McKenna woke up in the dark. Not because she wanted to, because silence demanded it. The Voss estate didn't sleep the way normal houses did. It held its breath. Every creak mattered. Every shadow had a place. And McKenna had learned long ago that the best way to survive in a house like this was to become part of the furniture. Useful. Quiet. Invisible. She moved through the hallways barefoot, her steps practiced and deliberate. She knew which floorboards groaned under pressure, which doors needed to be eased shut instead of pulled, which rooms smelled like expensive candles that cost more than her entire month's salary. This was her life now. Not the one she imagined when she left Kenya with nothing but a suitcase and a fragile dream, but it was hers, and she protected it the only way she knew how, by staying small. By 6 a.m., the kitchen was spotless, coffee brewed, fruit sliced perfectly, dishes arranged like they belonged in a magazine spread. McKenna stood by the counter, waiting. That's when Callum walked in. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, the kind that settles into your bones when you stop believing the Life you're living is actually yours. His tie hung loose around his neck. His shirt was wrinkled. He didn't notice her at first. Makina set a cup of ginger tea on the counter beside him without a word. Callum blinked, looked down at the cup, then at her. "You remembered," he said quietly. Makina nodded. "You don't sleep well without it." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or relief. Like someone had finally noticed him in a house full of people who only saw what they wanted. He picked up the cup, inhaled the steam, and let out a slow breath. "This house feels like it's holding its breath," he said. Makina didn't pretend otherwise. She never lied to him, not even in small ways. "It is," she said simply. Callum looked at her like he wanted to say more, like maybe, in another version of this life, they could have had a real conversation. Not employer and employee, just two people trapped in the same suffocating space. But before he could speak, the air in the room changed. Footsteps. Light. Precise. Deliberate. Saffron Voss entered the kitchen like she was stepping onto a stage she owned. Her silk robe shimmered under the soft morning light. Her hair fell perfectly over one shoulder. Even half asleep, she looked like someone who'd been photographed 1,000 times and knew exactly which angle worked best. "Callum," she said warmly, crossing the room to kiss his cheek. The kiss landed. Polite. Empty. Makina saw it clearly. The way Saffron's lips barely touched his skin. The way Callum didn't lean into it. The way the whole gesture felt rehearsed, like they were actors who'd forgotten their lines but kept performing anyway. Saffron's eyes flicked toward the tea, then toward Makina. Her smile didn't change, but something colder slid beneath it. "Oh, Makina," she said lightly. "I need my prenatal vitamins. The pink bottle, not the blue one. The blue one makes me nauseous." Makina moved immediately, retrieving the bottle from the cabinet and placing it on the counter. Saffron picked it up, still smiling. "Thank you, sweetheart." The word landed like a slap dressed up as kindness. Callum frowned slightly. "You're still feeling sick?" Saffron placed a hand on her stomach and sighed in that soft, delicate way that always seemed just a little too perfect. "Pregnancy is hard, darling," she said, "but it's worth it." She smiled at him again. Callum nodded, but he didn't smile back. Makina stood near the counter, watching. Always watching. And that's when she saw it. The moment Callum turned his head to glance out the window, Saffron's hand dropped from her stomach. Not slowly, instantly, like it had never mattered in the first place. And her smile? It disappeared too. Makina's chest tightened. She didn't say anything. She never did. But something dark and certain settled into her bones in that moment. Something was wrong. And whatever it was only just beginning. Saffron Voss was a masterpiece. At least that's what everyone believed. She moved through the world like someone who'd spent her entire life being watched, every gesture measured, every smile timed perfectly. Even the way she tilted her head when she listened felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror until it looked natural. Makina had seen women like her before, women who turned their lives into performances, who weaponized beauty and charm so well that no one questioned what was happening underneath. But Makina wasn't like everyone else. She noticed things, like the way Saffron's hand rested on her stomach whenever Callum was in the room. Protective. Tender. The picture of a glowing mother-to-be. But the second he left, the hand dropped. Every time. Makina watched it happen over and over, in the kitchen, in the hallway, on the terrace overlooking the ocean. Saffron would pose for an invisible camera, then relax the moment she thought no one was looking. It was small, easy to miss. But Makina didn't miss anything. That afternoon, Saffron hosted a small gathering in the garden. Friends, influencers, People who smiled too much and said nothing real. They cooed over her pregnancy like it was the most miraculous thing that had ever happened. Saffron glowed under the attention. "I can't believe how blessed we are," she said, her voice soft and sweet. "This baby is going to change everything." The women nodded. Someone took a photo. Saffron placed both hands on her belly and smiled, that perfect smile. McKenna stood near the table, refilling glasses, invisible as always. But she was watching, and she saw Saffron glance toward the house, checking to see if Callum was nearby. He wasn't, and just like that, the hands came down. The smile faded. Saffron's face went blank for just a second. Cold. Calculating. Then someone called her name, and the mask snapped back into place. Some people smile while they hurt you. If you've ever known someone like that, this story will hit different. Later that evening, McKenna was in the laundry room folding towels when the door opened. Saffron stepped inside. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching McKenna work. Her expression was calm. Too calm. "You're very efficient," Saffron said finally. McKenna kept folding. "Thank you. You know your place here, don't you?" McKenna's hands paused for just a second. Then she continued folding, her face neutral. "Yes, ma'am." Saffron stepped closer. Her voice dropped, still sweet but laced with something sharper. "Good. Because you should remember something, McKenna." She leaned in just slightly. "You're here because I allow it." The words hung in the air like smoke. McKenna didn't flinch, didn't look up, just kept folding the towels with steady hands. "I understand," she said quietly. Saffron smiled, not warmly, not kindly, just enough to show she'd made her point. "I'm glad we're clear," she said, turning toward the door. But before she left, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, and McKenna?" "Yes? This baby changes everything." The door closed softly behind her. McKenna stood alone in the laundry room, her heart pounding in her chest. She set the towel down slowly, her fingers trembling just slightly. She'd heard threats before, survived worse than words, but this felt different, because Saffron wasn't just protecting a lie. She was building something, and McKenna had just been put on notice. That night, McKenna couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room at the back of the house, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything she'd seen. The hand on the belly, the hand dropping, the pills in the bathroom cabinet. The way Saffron spoke about the baby like it was a tool, not a child. McKenna pressed her palm against her own stomach, a habit she didn't even realize she had, and for the first time, a terrible thought crept into her mind. What if the baby everyone was celebrating didn't even exist? And if it didn't, what was Saffron really planning? McKenna had rules. 3 of them, simple. Unbreakable. Don't get attached. Don't trust appearances. And never ignore a feeling that settles in your chest and refuses to leave. Those rules had kept her alive when she arrived in America with nothing but a suitcase and a phone number that led to a cleaning job in a motel outside Los Angeles. They kept her safe when men twice her size offered her rides she didn't ask for. They kept her silent when employers accused her of things she didn't do just to avoid paying her. Survival wasn't about being brave. It was about being smart. And right now, every instinct McKenna had was screaming that something in the Voss house was very, very wrong. Saffron's control was everywhere. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. She'd call McKenna into a room, then forget why she called her, make her stand there, wait. Like a test to see how long McKenna would stay invisible before daring to speak. She'd rearrange furniture, then ask McKenna why things looked different. Blame her for messes that didn't exist. Compliment her work in front of Callum, then criticize it the moment he left. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And Saffron smiled through all of it. McKenna had worked for difficult people before. Rich people who treated staff like objects, people who forgot your name even after you'd worked for them for years. But Saffron was different. She didn't just ignore Makina, she studied her, like she was waiting for something. One afternoon, Makina was cleaning the upstairs hallway when she heard Saffron's voice behind a closed door. She wasn't supposed to be up there. Saffron had been clear about that, but the vacuum was still running downstairs, and Makina had assumed she was alone. She froze. Saffron was on the phone. Her voice was low, controlled. "No, not yet," she said quietly. "Timing matters." Makina's pulse quickened. She should have walked away, should have gone back downstairs and pretended she hadn't heard anything, but her feet wouldn't move. "Everything has to look right," Saffron continued. "No mistakes, no questions." There was a pause, then Saffron laughed softly. Not a happy sound, something colder. "Trust me. I've thought of everything." Makina's hands tightened around the cleaning rag she was holding. Timing for what? What was Saffron planning? The door handle turned. Makina's heart stopped. She moved fast, slipping into the bathroom across the hall just as the door opened. She held her breath, watching through the crack as Saffron stepped out, phone still pressed to her ear. Saffron glanced down the hallway. Her eyes scanned the space like she was looking for something. Or someone. Then she walked away, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Makina waited until the sound faded completely before she stepped out. Her heart was still racing. She didn't know what Saffron was planning, didn't know who she'd been talking to or what timing meant, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever was coming, it was already in motion. That night, Makina couldn't shake the feeling. She tried to focus on her work, tried to tell herself she was overthinking, that rich people always had secrets, that it wasn't her job to care, but the rules she'd built her life on wouldn't let her ignore it. Don't trust appearances. Never ignore a feeling that refuses to leave. Saffron wasn't pregnant. Makina was almost certain now, but if she wasn't, then what was the baby for? Why the performance? Why the photos? Why the vitamins and the doctor appointments she never let anyone attend? Makina sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, and then, slowly, a darker thought crept in. What if the baby wasn't fake? What if it was real? But not Saffron's. Makina's stomach twisted. No, that didn't make sense. But the pills in the cabinet, the phone call, the timing, it all pointed to something bigger than a lie, something planned, something that involved more than just Saffron. Makina pressed her hands against her face, trying to steady her breathing. She wanted to leave. Pack her things and disappear before whatever storm was building finally broke. But she couldn't. Because deep down, beneath the fear and the rules and the survival instincts, she knew she was already part of this, and walking away wouldn't save her. The pregnancy test was in the trash, not hidden, not buried under tissues or wrappers, just there. Makina saw it while emptying the bathroom bin in Saffron's private suite, the one she used when she didn't want Callum around, the one with the locked drawer and the bottles Makina wasn't supposed to notice. She should have looked away, but she didn't. The test was wrapped carefully in paper towels, folded like someone wanted it found but not immediately. 2 pink lines. Positive. Makina stared at it longer than she should have. Something felt wrong. The plastic was scratched. Worn. Like it had been handled too many times. Like it had been sitting in a drawer somewhere before it ended up in this trash can. Makina's stomach twisted. She put the test back exactly where she found it, her hands shaking slightly. Then she looked around the bathroom. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The counters gleamed, the towels hung symmetrically. Even the soap dispenser looked staged, but Makina wasn't looking at the surface anymore. She was looking beneath it. Her eyes landed on the medicine cabinet. She hesitated. This was a line she hadn't crossed before, going through someone's things, invading their privacy. but the rules she lived by were screaming at her now. Don't trust appearances. Never ignore a feeling that refuses to leave. She opened the cabinet. Inside were the usual things: expensive skincare, vitamins, prescription bottles with Saffron's name on them, and then, tucked in the back, an unmarked bottle, small, white pills, no label. McKenna picked it up carefully, turning it over in her hand. No pharmacy sticker, no instructions, nothing. She unscrewed the cap and looked. Inside. The pills were uniform. Clinical. The kind you get from a doctor, not a health store. But why wouldn't they be labeled? McKenna's mind raced. She'd worked for enough wealthy families to know that people hid things, affairs, addictions, secrets that couldn't survive daylight. But this felt different, because Saffron wasn't hiding these pills from the world. She was hiding them from Callum. McKenna put the bottle back exactly where she found it and closed the cabinet door. Her reflection stared back at her in the mirror. Calm face, steady hands, but her eyes told a different story. She knew now. The pregnancy was a lie. Or at least, it wasn't what everyone thought it was. Imagine knowing the truth, but having no voice. Would you risk everything to speak? That night, McKenna lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind wouldn't stop. She replayed every moment, every inconsistency. Every time Saffron's hand dropped from her belly when no one was watching. Every appointment she attended alone. Every pill she took that had nothing to do with prenatal care. And the test. That old scratched pregnancy test that looked like it had been used as a prop. McKenna pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to quiet the storm in her head. She could speak up, tell Callum what she'd seen, show him the pills, the test, make him question everything. But then what? She was a housekeeper, an immigrant, a woman with no power, no money, no voice that mattered in a world like this. Saffron would destroy her. She'd call McKenna a liar, a thief, someone who invaded her privacy and made up stories. And who would Callum believe? His wife? Or the woman who cleaned his house? McKenna felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest. Silence was survival. It always had been. But this time, staying silent felt like drowning. Because if the pregnancy was fake, what was it for? Why the performance? Why the photos and the doctor visits and the carefully staged moments? What was Saffron building toward? And then, slowly, a thought crept in that made McKenna's blood run cold. What if the baby was real? But it wasn't Saffron's. What if someone else was carrying it? McKenna sat up in bed, her heart pounding. No, that was insane. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit. The timing, the secrecy, the control. Saffron wasn't the kind of woman who left things to chance. If she wanted a baby but couldn't have one herself, McKenna's hands trembled as the realization hit her. She thought back to the medical appointment she'd gone to months ago, the one Saffron had scheduled for her, called it a routine check, said it was part of her employment benefits. McKenna had signed papers she didn't fully understand, trusted people she shouldn't have. And now, her breath caught in her throat. She pressed a hand to her stomach, and for the first time she felt it. The exhaustion, the nausea, the dizziness she'd been ignoring for weeks. No, it couldn't be. But deep down, McKenna already knew. The baby everyone was celebrating wasn't Saffron's, it was hers. The dinner was supposed to be romantic. That's what Saffron told Callum that morning, just the two of them. Candles, wine, a quiet evening to reconnect. But when McKenna set the table that night, she noticed 3 place settings. Not 2, 3. Her stomach sank. She didn't say anything, just finished arranging the silverware and stepped back into the shadows where she belonged. The doorbell rang at 7 sharp. Saffron answered it herself, which she never did. She was smiling that perfect smile, the one that looked warm but never reached her eyes. "Blythe, darling," "Come in." The woman who entered wasn't what Makina expected. She was tall, sharp, dressed in a tailored black coat that screamed power. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a countdown. Callum appeared in the hallway, frowning. "I thought this was just us tonight," he said. Saffron laughed lightly, touching his arm. "I know, darling, but Blythe had some ideas I thought you'd want to hear. It'll only take a minute." Callum's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Makina watched from the kitchen doorway as they moved into the dining room. She poured water, brought out the first course, stayed invisible, but she was listening. Blythe didn't waste time. "The pregnancy narrative needs more emotional pull," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Public affection. Vulnerability. People need to feel invested in this journey." Makina's hand stilled on the serving tray. Callum set his fork down. "This isn't a campaign, Blythe." Blythe smiled politely. "Everything is a campaign, Callum. Especially when your family's reputation is on the line." Saffron leaned forward, her hand resting on her stomach in that practiced way. "She's right, darling. People connect with authenticity. We just need to give them something unforgettable." Callum stared at his wife, and for the first time, Makina saw something shift in his face. Not anger, doubt. It was small, fleeting, but it was there, like a crack forming in glass. Blythe pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. "I've outlined a content calendar. Maternity shoots. Behind-the-scenes moments. Maybe a charity event tied to infant health." Saffron nodded eagerly. "I love that. We'll give them something they can't ignore." Callum didn't touch the tablet. He just sat there, staring at it like it was something foreign. "This is our life," he said quietly. "Not a story." Saffron's smile didn't falter. "Our life is a story, Callum, and we get to decide how it's told." The room went silent. Makina stood against the wall, holding the empty tray, barely breathing. She'd seen enough wealthy families to know how they operated. Image over truth, control over honesty. But this felt different, because Saffron wasn't just protecting an image. She was building one from scratch, and Callum was starting to see it. Blythe left an hour later, her tablet full of notes, her confidence unshaken. Saffron walked her to the door, their voices low and conspiratorial. Makina moved through the dining room, clearing plates, keeping her head down. Callum sat alone at the table, staring at nothing. He looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, like a man who'd just realized he was trapped in a story someone else was writing. Makina hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Can I get you anything, sir?" Callum looked up, startled, like he'd forgotten she was there. "No," he said. "Thank you, Makina." She nodded and turned to leave. But then he spoke again. "Do you ever feel like people perform their lives instead of living them?" Makina stopped. She wasn't supposed to answer questions like that, wasn't supposed to have opinions, but something in his voice made her turn back. "Most people do," she said honestly. Callum let out a slow breath. "My wife is very good at it." The words hung in the air between them. Makina didn't know what to say, didn't know if she should say anything at all, so she just nodded and left him, sitting there alone. Later that night, Makina was in the kitchen finishing the dishes when she heard voices from the hallway. Saffron was on the phone again. Makina froze, her hands still submerged in soapy water. "Everything is almost in place," Saffron said quietly. "Just a few more weeks." A pause. "No, he won't suspect anything. I've made sure of it." Another pause. Then Saffron laughed softly. "Trust me. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." Makina's heart pounded. She dried her hands slowly, trying to stay calm. But her mind was racing. Too late for what? What was Saffron planning? And why did it feel like McKenna was standing at the edge of something terrible? Footsteps approached. McKenna quickly turned back to the sink, scrubbing a plate that was already clean. Saffron appeared in the doorway. She looked at McKenna, smiled. "Good night, McKenna," she said sweetly. "Good night, ma'am." Saffron walked away, humming softly to herself, and McKenna stood there in the empty kitchen, her hands shaking, because she knew now. Whatever storm was coming, it wasn't going to break quietly. It was going to destroy everything, and she was right in the middle of it. Callum stood alone on the terrace, staring out at the ocean. The wind was cold that night, sharp, the kind that cuts through expensive clothes and reminds you that money can't control everything. McKenna saw him from the kitchen window. She should have left him alone, should have finished her work and disappeared into her room like she always did. But something about the way he stood there, shoulders slumped, hands gripping the railing, made her pause. He looked like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe. She grabbed a blanket from the closet and walked outside. The wind hit her immediately, pulling at her hair, stinging her eyes. Callum didn't turn around. "You don't have to," he said quietly. McKenna set the blanket on the chair beside him. "It's cold." He looked at the blanket, then at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or surprise that someone still saw him as human instead of just a name. "Thank you," he said. McKenna nodded and turned to leave, but then he spoke again. "Do you ever feel like people perform happiness instead of living it?" She stopped. This was dangerous territory. She knew that. Employees didn't have conversations like this with their employers, especially not ones who were married, especially not in houses like this. But something in his voice pulled her back. "Most people do," she said. Callum let out a slow breath, his hand still gripping the railing. "My wife is very good at it." The words landed heavy between them. McKenna didn't respond. Didn't need to. They both knew what he meant. Callum turned slightly, looking at her for the first time. Really looking. Not the way people usually did. Past her, through her, like she was part of the furniture. He saw her. "I wanted a family," he said quietly. "Not headlines." McKenna's chest tightened. She understood that feeling more than he knew. Sometimes the smallest moments change everything. Share this if you believe in truth over appearances. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Real. Like two people standing in the same storm, finally admitting they were drowning. Callum picked up the blanket and draped it over his shoulders. The wind shifted, pulling it loose. McKenna reached out to adjust it. Their hands brushed, just for a second. But it was enough. Not romance, not desire. Recognition. Two people who'd been invisible for too long, suddenly seeing each other clearly. Callum pulled his hand back first, like the touch had burned him, like he was afraid of what it meant. "I should go inside," he said. McKenna nodded. "Good night, Mr. Voss." "Callum," he said. Just Callum. She hesitated, then nodded again. "Good night, Callum." He walked back toward the house, the blanket still draped over his shoulders. McKenna stayed on the terrace a moment longer, her hand still tingling where his had touched hers. She told herself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a moment, a mistake, something that would disappear by morning. But deep down, she knew better. Because understanding someone, really understanding them, was more dangerous than anything else. It made you care. And caring in a house like this could get you destroyed. Later that night, McKenna lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She replayed the conversation over and over, the way Callum's voice had cracked when he talked about wanting a family, the way he'd looked at her like she was real, the way their hands had brushed and the world had paused for just a second. She pressed her palm against her stomach. She'd been ignoring the signs for weeks now. The exhaustion, the nausea, the dizziness that came and went without warning. But tonight, lying in the dark, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She was pregnant, and the baby growing inside her wasn't hers by choice. It was Saffron's plan, Saffron's control, Saffron's lie. McKenna's hands trembled as the full weight of it settled over her. She'd been used, turned into a tool without her consent. And now she was carrying a child that was supposed to belong to someone else. But the worst part? The part that made her chest ache and her eyes sting? She was starting to feel something for Callum. Not love, not even attraction, just understanding. And in a world built on lies, understanding felt like the most dangerous thing she could give. McKenna closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She didn't know what was going to happen, didn't know how this story would end, but she knew one thing for certain. The moment she'd stepped onto that terrace tonight, everything had changed, and there was no going back. The boathouse smelled like salt and gasoline. McKenna stood at the entrance, supplies in hand, trying to focus on the task Saffron had given her that morning. We're taking the boat out this weekend," Saffron had said cheerfully. "A little baby moon. Just the three of us. Make sure everything's ready. 3 of us." The words had sent a chill down McKenna's spine, but she'd nodded and said nothing. Now, standing in the dim boathouse, that chill had turned into something colder. She moved through the space, checking life jackets, organizing supplies, doing the job she was paid to do. But then she saw it. Behind a stack of orange vests, tucked against the wall like someone had tried to hide it, but not well enough. A folder. Cream-colored. Expensive-looking. With Saffron's name printed neatly on the tab. McKenna's pulse quickened. She shouldn't touch it. Shouldn't look. But her hands moved before her mind could stop them. She pulled the folder out and opened it. The first page was a medical document. Clinical. Cold. Fertility clinic letterhead. McKenna's eyes scanned the words quickly, her heart pounding harder with every line. Embryo transfer. Gestational carrier. Consent forms. Her breath caught. She flipped to the next page, and then her entire world stopped. Under the heading Carrier Information, a name appeared in bold print. McKenna Njeri. Her knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the boat to steady herself, her vision blurring as the papers shook in her hands. No, this couldn't be real. She flipped through the documents frantically now, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold them. Dates, signatures, medical procedures, all of it official, all of it legal, and all of it done without her understanding what she was agreeing to. She remembered now, months ago. The appointment Saffron had scheduled called it a routine health check, said it was part of her employment benefits. McKenna had been grateful. She didn't have insurance, didn't have access to doctors, so she'd gone, signed the papers they gave her, trusted people she shouldn't have. And now, McKenna pressed a hand to her stomach, her entire body shaking. The nausea, the exhaustion, the dizziness. It wasn't stress. It wasn't overwork. She was pregnant. With Saffron's baby. Or Callum's baby. Or whoever's baby this was supposed to be. But it was inside her body, growing inside her without her permission. Tears blurred her vision. She felt violated, used, turned into a tool for someone else's plan. And the worst part? She had no idea how long Saffron had been planning this, how long she'd been watching McKenna, manipulating her, setting this up. Footsteps echoed behind her, slow, deliberate. McKenna's blood ran cold. She turned. Saffron stood in the doorway of the boathouse, backlit by the afternoon sun. Her expression was calm, too calm, not surprised, not angry, just calm, like she'd been expecting this. "Oh, McKenna," Saffron said softly. "You weren't supposed to find that. Makina's hands tightened around the folder, her voice shaking. What did you do to me? Saffron stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The click of the latch felt final. I gave you an opportunity, Saffron said smoothly. A purpose. You should be grateful. Makina's chest heaved. You used me. Saffron tilted her head, her smile never faltering. I secured my future, our future, Callum's and mine. By turning my body into a lie, Saffron's smile tightened. You signed the papers, Makina. Everything was legal. I didn't know what I was signing. That's not my problem. The words hit like a slap. Makina stared at her, disbelief and rage warring inside her chest. Saffron took another step closer, her voice dropping to something softer, more dangerous. You have a choice now, she said. You can make this difficult, cause problems. Try to ruin everything I've built. She paused, her eyes cold and sharp. Or you can stay quiet. Finish what you started. And when this is over, I'll make sure you're taken care of. Makina's voice cracked. Taken care of? Saffron smiled. Money. Anew. Start somewhere far from here. Isn't that what you wanted when you came to this country? Makina felt sick, because Saffron wasn't threatening her. She was offering her a deal, a trade, silence for survival. Makina looked down at the folder in her hands, then back at Saffron, and for the first time in her life, she didn't stay quiet. No, she said. Saffron's smile vanished. What did you say? I said no. The air between them crackled with tension. Saffron's eyes narrowed, and for just a second, Makina saw something terrifying beneath the mask. Not anger. Calculation. You're making a mistake, Saffron said quietly. Makina's voice was steady now, stronger. The mistake was trusting you. Saffron stared at her for a long moment, then she smiled again. But this time it wasn't warm. It was a promise. We'll see, she said softly, and she turned and walked out of the boathouse, leaving Makina standing there alone, holding the proof of her own betrayal. Makina didn't wait. She walked, straight from the boathouse to the main house, the folder clutched in her shaking hands. She was done being invisible, done being silent, done being used. Callum was in his study, sitting at his desk, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Makina? You need to see this, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Before he could respond, Saffron appeared in the doorway behind her. Makina, she said sweetly, her tone laced with warning. What are you doing? Makina ignored her and placed the folder on Callum's desk. Read it, she said. Callum frowned, looking between the two women. What's going on? Saffron moved into the room, her smile still in place but her eyes sharp. Makina's been going through my personal things. I think she's confused. I'm not confused, Makina said, her voice stronger now. Read the folder, Callum. He hesitated, then opened it. The room went silent. Makina watched his face as he read, watched the confusion turn to disbelief, watched the disbelief turn to horror. His hand stilled on the pages. What is this? He whispered. Saffron crossed her arms, her voice calm. It's a solution. Callum looked up at her, his face pale. A solution? I couldn't carry a baby myself, Saffron said simply. So I found someone who could. Callum's eyes darted to Makina, then back to the documents. You used her? Saffron's smile tightened. I secured our future, Callum. I gave us the family you wanted. Without telling me? You would have said no. The words hung in the air like poison. Callum stood slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. You turned her into a surrogate without her consent? She signed the papers, Saffron said coolly. McKenna's voice cut through. I didn't know what I was signing. Saffron turned to her, eyes cold. That's not my responsibility. Callum stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time, not the woman he married. Hey, stranger. You lied to me, he said quietly. To everyone. Saffron stepped closer, her voice softening, shifting into the tone she always used when she needed to manipulate him. I did what I had to do to protect us, to protect our legacy. Legacy? Callum's voice cracked. You used a human being like she was nothing. Saffron's mask slipped for just a second. She is nothing, Callum. She's staff. The words landed like a bomb. McKenna felt them like a physical blow, but she didn't flinch, because she'd heard worse, survived worse, and she wasn't backing down. My place is not inside your lie, McKenna said, her voice steady. Saffron turned to her, fury flashing in her eyes. Know your place. I do, McKenna said, and it's not here. Callum ran a hand through his hair, his breathing ragged. This is insane. This is illegal. It's done, Saffron said sharply, and you can either accept it or you can destroy everything we've built. Callum stared at her, his jaw clenched. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Saffron's expression changed. The anger faded. The smile returned. Soft, calculated. Let's all calm down, she said lightly. We're stressed. We need to clear our heads. She looked at Callum, then at McKenna. Let's go out on the water tonight, she said. Just the three of us. We can talk this through. Privately. McKenna's blood ran cold. Callum frowned. There's a storm warning. A little rain won't hurt us, Saffron said. We need this, Callum. Please. He hesitated, and McKenna saw it in his face. He wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe this could be fixed, because believing anything else meant admitting his entire life was a lie. Some people will destroy you to protect their image. Don't let this story disappear. Fine, Callum said finally. But we're talking about this. Really talking, Saffron smiled. Of course, darling. She turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking softly against the floor. McKenna stood frozen, her heart pounding. Callum looked at her, his face full of guilt and confusion. McKenna, Don't, she said quietly. Just don't. She turned and left before he could say anything else. Because she knew. Deep in her bones, she knew. Saffron wasn't taking them out on the water to talk. She was taking them out to finish what she'd started. And McKenna had just become a problem that needed to disappear. That night, as the sky darkened and the wind began to howl, McKenna stood in her room, staring out at the ocean. The storm was coming. And so was something worse. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the life growing inside her. A life she never asked for. A life that had turned her into a target. She didn't know if she'd survive the night, but she knew one thing for certain. If Saffron thought she could sink the truth along with her, she was wrong. The storm warnings came in that afternoon. Red alerts on every weather channel. Winds up to 50 miles per hour. Waves reaching 12 feet. Coastal, advisories urging everyone to stay indoors. Saffron ignored all of it. We're going, she said firmly, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed. We need this conversation. And we need it now. McKenna stood near the counter, her stomach churning. It's not safe. Saffron turned to her, eyes cold. I didn't ask for your opinion. Callum walked in, keys in hand, his face tight with tension. Maybe we should wait until tomorrow. The forecast is bad. Saffron's expression softened instantly, the mask sliding back into place. Darling, we can handle a little rain. The boat's been through worse, and we need this. Please. Callum hesitated, and McKenna saw it happening. He was choosing to believe her, Again. Because the alternative was too painful. Fine, he said, but we stay close to shore. Saffron smiled. Of course. Makina's hands trembled as she grabbed her jacket. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to run, to refuse, to stay behind. But she knew what would happen if she did. Saffron would find another way, and next time, Makina wouldn't see it coming. The boat rocked violently as they pushed away from the dock. Rain slashed across the deck, cold and sharp. The sky was a bruised gray, clouds rolling in like a warning no one wanted to hear. Saffron stood at the helm, her hair whipping around her face, her smile never faltering. Callum sat near the bow, gripping the railing, his face pale. Makina stayed near the back, her heart pounding, her eyes on Saffron. They moved farther from shore, too far. Saffron, turn us around, Callum shouted over the wind. Just a little farther, she called back. The waves grew higher. The boat tilted sharply to one side, then the other. Makina gripped the side, her knuckles white. And then, without warning, the engine cut. The sudden silence was deafening. The boat drifted, helpless against the waves. Callum stood. What happened? Saffron frowned, her performance flawless. I don't know. It just stopped. Check the engine, Callum said, moving toward the cabin. But Makina didn't move, because she'd heard something. A sound beneath the roar of the storm. A click. Deliberate. Mechanical. Not a malfunction. A switch. Her blood ran cold. She looked at Saffron, and Saffron looked back. For just a second, the mask slipped, and Makina saw the truth in her eyes. This wasn't an accident. Before Makina could speak, the boat lurched violently. Something heavy shifted beneath the deck. A grinding sound, metal scraping against metal, and then water started pouring in, not slowly, fast, like something had been opened from below. Callum stumbled back, staring at the water flooding the cabin. What the hell? The boat tilted sharply. Makina's feet slipped. She grabbed the railing, her heart racing. Saffron screamed, loud, panicked, perfect. Callum, help me. But her eyes weren't panicked. They were calculating. Callum looked between the rising water and his wife, horror spreading across his face. And then he understood. This wasn't chaos. This was a plan. You did this, he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. Saffron's smile returned, just for a second. I did what I had to. The boat tilted again, steeper this time. Water rushed over the sides, cold and relentless. Makina tried to hold on, but the force was too strong. She slipped, fell, hit the water hard. The ocean swallowed her whole. Cold, dark, endless. She kicked toward the surface, her lungs screaming, her arms burning. She broke through, gasping, choking on salt water. The boat was sinking fast. Saffron was in the water now, screaming Callum's name. Callum dove in after her, but then he stopped. He turned, and he saw Makina struggling, going under again. His face twisted with something terrible. A choice. The kind no one should ever have to make. Save his wife. Or save the woman carrying his child. The storm roared around them. The waves grew higher, and in that moment, Callum realized the full weight of what Saffron had done. She hadn't just lied, she'd planned this. All of it. The boat, the storm, the timing. She'd brought them out here to finish what she started, to erase Makina and make it look like an accident. The water pulled Makina under again. Her vision blurred. Her body went numb. And for a second she thought this was it. This was how her story ended, drowned in someone else's lie. But then she felt a hand lock around her waist, strong, desperate, pulling her up. She broke the surface, coughing, gasping. Callum's face was inches from hers. I've got you, he said. Behind them, Saffron screamed again. Callum. I'm pregnant. The words cut through the storm like a blade. And Callum froze. Because he knew now. He knew the baby wasn't hers, but the world didn't. And if he saved Makina instead of Saffron, everyone would think he'd let his pregnant wife die. The storm waited. the ocean pulled, and Callum had seconds to decide. The ocean didn't care about choices. It pulled. It crushed. It swallowed everything without judgment. McKenna went under again, the cold wrapping around her like a vice. Her lungs burned. Her arms felt like lead. Every kick toward the surface took more energy than she had left. She broke through one more time, gasping, choking on salt water and rain. Through blurred vision, she saw Callum still holding her, but his eyes were locked on Saffron. His wife was screaming, thrashing, her blonde hair plastered to her face, her arms reaching out desperately. "Callum, please!" Her voice cracked, raw, terrified, and then she screamed the words that changed everything. "I'm carrying your child!" The storm seemed to pause, just for a second, long enough for the weight of those words to settle over everything. Callum's grip on McKenna loosened slightly. Not enough to let her go, but enough for her to feel it. The hesitation, the war happening inside him. McKenna saw it in his eyes, the impossible calculation, the choice that shouldn't exist but did. Save his wife, the woman he married, the mother of his child, or save McKenna, the woman who'd been used, the woman telling the truth. Who would you save? The person you promised to love, or the person telling the truth? Saffron went under, came back up, coughing violently. "Callum, I'm begging you." McKenna's legs were numb now. She couldn't feel her fingers. The cold was stealing everything from her, piece by piece. She looked at Callum and she saw something she'd never seen before. Doubt. Not about who to save, about who Saffron really was. Because the baby wasn't Saffron's. Callum knew that now. He'd read the documents, seen the proof. The pregnancy Saffron was screaming about wasn't hers. It was McKenna's, and yet she was still lying, still performing, even now, even here, even while drowning, because that's who Saffron was. A woman who would lie with her last breath if it meant keeping control. Callum's jaw clenched. His eyes moved from Saffron to McKenna. And in that moment, something shifted. Not love, not obligation, truth. He saw McKenna clearly now, really saw her, not as staff, not as a surrogate, not as a tool, as a person, someone who'd been silenced, used, turned into a weapon against herself, someone who deserved to survive. Callum's grip on McKenna tightened, and then he made his choice. He turned away from Saffron and swam toward the emergency ring floating a few feet away. Saffron's scream changed instantly. Not fear, rage. "You can't do this to me." Her voice was sharp now, cutting, the mask completely gone. "Callum, I am your wife." A wave crashed between them. When it cleared, Saffron was still there, but farther away now, still screaming, still clawing at the water. But Callum didn't turn back. He dragged McKenna to the orange ring and pulled her onto it. She collapsed, coughing violently, her entire body shaking. Callum climbed on beside her, breathing hard, his face pale and strained. For a moment, they just sat there, gasping, shivering, alive. Then Callum looked back. Saffron had grabbed onto a piece of debris from the sinking boat. She was holding on, hair streaming behind her, eyes locked on them through the rain. But she wasn't crying anymore. She was smiling. Not relief, not gratitude. Promise. Like this wasn't over. Like she knew something they didn't. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating her face for just a second. And in that flash, McKenna saw it clearly. Saffron didn't think she was losing. She thought this was part of the plan. Callum saw it too. His face went rigid, because he understood now what McKenna had known all along. This wasn't about survival. This was about control. And Saffron would burn the entire world down before she gave it up. Callum reached into his jacket pocket with shaking hands. His satellite phone. Waterproof. Still working. He didn't call the Coast Guard. He didn't call security. He called his lawyer. McKenna stared at him, confused, as he pressed the phone to his ear. "I need you to listen very carefully," Callum said, his voice steady despite the storm. I'm about to destroy my entire life, and I need you to make sure it's legal. He paused. Then he looked at Saffron, still floating in the distance, still smiling. My wife tried to kill us, he said clearly, and I have proof. Behind them, rescue lights appeared on the horizon. Bright, cutting through the darkness. Help was coming. But McKenna knew the real storm was just beginning. Because when those rescue crews pulled them from the water, when the truth finally came out, nothing would ever be the same. Saffron's smile widened as the lights grew closer, and McKenna realized something terrifying. Saffron wasn't afraid of being rescued. She was counting on it, because she still believed she could control the narrative, still believed she could turn this around, still believed that when the cameras arrived, when the world started watching, she'd be the victim, and McKenna would disappear. The rescue boat was less than a minute away now, and the real fight for survival was about to begin. The moment fractured into pieces. Callum's hand was on Saffron's arm. She was clinging to him, screaming, begging, her performance flawless even in the middle of a storm. Please, Callum, the baby. But Callum had already made his decision. He let go. Saffron's eyes went wide, not with fear, with disbelief. What are you doing? She gasped. Callum didn't answer. He turned and swam toward McKenna. The ocean roared between them, waves crashing violently, pulling everything in different directions. But Callum pushed through it, his arms cutting through the water with desperate strength. Behind him, Saffron's scream changed. It wasn't panic anymore. It was rage. Pure, unfiltered, raw. You can't leave me? Her voice cut through the storm like a blade. I gave you everything. Callum reached McKenna just as she went under again. He grabbed her, pulling her up, locking his arm around her waist. She coughed, violently, gasping for air, her body limp and freezing. I've got you, Callum said through gritted teeth. Stay with me. He dragged her toward the orange emergency ring, bobbing a few feet away. Every stroke was agony. The cold had seeped into his muscles. The waves kept trying to rip her away from him, but he didn't let go. Behind them, Saffron was still screaming. This is a mistake, Callum. Her voice was sharp now, controlled, like she was already planning her next move. You'll regret this. Callum finally reached the ring. He pulled McKenna onto it first, his hands shaking from exhaustion and cold. She collapsed against the side, coughing up seawater, her entire body trembling. Callum climbed on after her, breathing hard, his face pale. For a moment, they just sat there. Alive. Barely. McKenna's vision blurred. She could barely feel her hands. Her legs were numb, but she was breathing. And Callum had saved her. She looked at him through the rain, her voice barely a whisper. Why? Callum met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something in them that wasn't doubt or confusion. Clarity. Because you're the only one who told me the truth, he said. A wave crashed over them, cold and brutal. When it cleared, Saffron was still there. She'd grabbed onto a piece of debris from the sinking boat. Her hands gripped it tightly, her hair streaming behind her like something out of a nightmare. She wasn't drowning. She was floating, watching, and she was smiling. Not the warm practice smile she used for cameras, something colder, darker, like she knew something they didn't. Callum saw it too. His jaw clenched. She planned all of this, he said quietly. McKenna nodded, too exhausted to speak. She brought us out here to kill you, he continued, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief, and make it look like an accident. McKenna's chest tightened. She'd known. Deep down, she'd known. But hearing him say it out loud made it real. Saffron wasn't just controlling. She was dangerous. Callum pulled out his satellite phone, his hands trembling as he pressed it to his ear. The line connected. I need you to listen very carefully, he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. "I'm about to destroy my entire life, and I need you to make sure it's legal." There was a pause. Then he looked directly at Saffron, still floating in the distance, still watching. "My wife tried to kill us," he said clearly. "And I have proof." Makina's breath caught. Saffron heard him, and her smile didn't fade. It widened, because she still believed she could win. Still believed that when the rescue crews arrived, when the cameras started rolling, when the world started watching, she'd be the hero. The grieving, pregnant wife who barely survived a tragic accident. And Callum and Makina would be the villains, the ungrateful husband who abandoned her, the jealous employee who caused the whole thing. Saffron had built her entire life on controlling narratives, and she wasn't about to stop now. Lights appeared on the horizon, bright, cutting through the darkness. The rescue boat was coming. Fast. Callum held Makina tighter as the waves continued to batter them. "When they get here," he said quietly, "tell them everything. Don't hold back." Makina looked at him, fear tightening in her chest. "They won't believe me." "They will," Callum said firmly, "because I'm going to make sure they do." The rescue boat was close now. Voices shouted over the storm. Spotlights swept across the water. Saffron let go of the debris and started swimming toward the boat, her movements deliberate, her face shifting back into the mask of fear and vulnerability. She was already performing, already building her story. And Makina realized with a sinking feeling, the hardest fight wasn't surviving the ocean. It was surviving the truth in a world that wanted to believe Saffron's lie. The rescue crew reached Saffron first. They pulled her onto the boat, wrapping her in blankets, asking if she was okay. She nodded weakly, her hand moving to her stomach. "The baby," she whispered. "Please, is the baby okay?" And just like that, the narrative began. Makina watched from the emergency ring, her heart pounding because she knew what was coming, the battle for truth, and it was going to be bloody. Makina couldn't stop shaking. Her body was past cold, past exhaustion, past fear. She was running on nothing but survival instinct and the desperate hope that this nightmare would end. Callum sat beside her on the emergency ring, breathing hard, his face drained of color. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The storm still raged around them, waves crashing relentlessly, rain slashing down like tiny blades, but they were alive. For now. Makina's eyes drifted across the water, searching through the darkness and rain, and then she saw her, Saffron. She'd surfaced about 20 feet away, clinging to a piece of debris from the boat. Her hair was plastered to her face, her makeup had washed away, her expensive clothes hung heavy and soaked, but she wasn't panicking, she wasn't crying, she was smiling. Not a warm smile, not a relieved smile, a promise. Cold, calculated, terrifying, like she knew something they didn't. Makina's blood ran colder than the ocean. Callum saw it too. He stiffened beside her, his jaw clenching. "She's not done," he said quietly. Makina nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "She never is." Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating Saffron's face for just a second. And in that flash, Makina saw it clearly. Saffron wasn't afraid of drowning. She was afraid of losing control, and she still believed she hadn't. Callum reached into his jacket pocket with trembling hands, his satellite phone. Waterproof. Still working. Makina watched as he pressed it to his ear, his movements slow and deliberate. "Who are you calling?" she asked. "Not the Coast Guard," he said. "Then who?" "My lawyer." Makina's eyes widened, the line connected. Callum's voice was steady despite the storm raging around them. "Richard, it's Callum Voss. I need you to listen very carefully." There was a pause. "I'm about to destroy my entire life, and I need you to make sure it's legal." McKenna stared at him, her heart pounding. Callum looked across the water at Saffron, still floating, still watching, still smiling. "My wife tried to kill us," he said clearly, "and I have proof." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Saffron heard him. McKenna saw her expression shift. Just slightly. Not fear. Annoyance. Like Callum had just made a move in a game she was confident she'd still win. "Document everything," Callum continued into the phone. "The boat, the medical records, the fertility clinic. All of it." He paused, his eyes never leaving Saffron. "And get a restraining order ready. I want her nowhere near McKenna." McKenna's chest tightened. He was protecting her. Even now. Even after everything. Lights appeared on the horizon. Bright. Cutting through the darkness like salvation. The rescue boat. Callum ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. "When they get here," he said quietly, "tell them everything. Don't hold back. Don't protect anyone." McKenna nodded, her throat tight. The rescue boat was close now. Voices shouted over the storm. Spotlights swept across the water. Saffron immediately started waving, her movements frantic, her face shifting into a mask of terror. The performance had begun. Sometimes surviving isn't the end of the fight. If this story shook you, others need to see it too. The rescue crew reached Saffron first. They pulled her onto the boat, wrapping her in thermal blankets, asking if she was hurt. She shook her head weakly, her hand moving to her stomach. "The baby," she whispered, her voice breaking perfectly. "Please, is my baby okay?" McKenna watched from the emergency ring, her stomach twisting, because Saffron wasn't just surviving. She was already rewriting the story. The rescue crew turned their spotlight toward Callum and McKenna next. A diver jumped into the water, swimming toward them. "We've got you," he shouted. "Hold on." Callum helped McKenna onto the rescue board first, his hand steady even though his entire body was shaking. The diver pulled them toward the boat. As they approached, McKenna could see Saffron sitting on the deck, wrapped in blankets, surrounded by concerned crew members. She looked small, fragile, vulnerable, the perfect victim. And then Saffron looked up. Her eyes locked on McKenna, and for just a second, the mask slipped. The smile returned. That same cold, terrifying promise. "You're not done with me yet." The crew pulled McKenna onto the boat. Paramedics rushed forward, wrapping her in blankets, checking her vitals, asking questions she could barely hear over the roar of blood in her ears. Callum climbed on after her, refusing help, his eyes scanning the deck until they landed on Saffron. She was already talking to one of the crew members, her voice soft and tearful. "It all happened so fast," she was saying. "The engine just died. The boat started sinking. I thought we were all going to die." She wiped her eyes, her hand trembling perfectly. "Thank God you found us. Thank God my baby's safe." McKenna's hands clenched into fists. Callum stepped forward. "She's lying," he said loudly. Every head turned. Saffron looked up, her eyes wide and wounded. "Callum, what are you—" "She sabotaged the boat," Callum said, his voice cutting through the noise. "She tried to kill us." The crew members exchanged confused glances. Saffron's face crumpled. "Darling, you're in shock. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," Callum said, "and when we get to shore, I'm pressing charges." Saffron's expression shifted, just for a second. The vulnerability vanished, and something darker took its place. But then she caught herself. The mask snapped back. "I don't know what she's told you," Saffron said softly, glancing at McKenna. "But this is a misunderstanding." McKenna found her voice. "It's not." Saffron's eyes narrowed. "You need to stay quiet," she said, her tone sharper now. "No," McKenna said, her voice stronger. "I'm done staying quiet." The boat rocked as the engine roared to life, heading toward shore. And McKenna knew. The real fight was just beginning. The harbor was chaos. Ambulances, police cars, news vans already circling like vultures. Word had spread fast. Billionaire's boat sinks during storm. Wife rescued. Dramatic survival. The headlines were already being written. Saffron was wheeled off the rescue boat first, a paramedic holding her hand, another checking her vitals. She played her part perfectly. Eyes closed, body limp, hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Please," she whispered, her voice weak and trembling. "My baby. Is my baby okay?" The paramedics exchanged concerned looks. "We need to get you to the hospital immediately, ma'am," one of them said. Saffron nodded weakly. "Just save my baby, please." Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. McKenna watched from the boat, still wrapped in a thermal blanket, her body numb from cold and shock. This was it. Saffron was going to win. She was going to turn herself into the victim, and no one would ever know the truth. But then Callum stepped forward. His voice cut through the noise like a knife. "She isn't pregnant." Everything stopped. The paramedics froze. The reporters went silent. Saffron's eyes snapped open. "What?" one of the paramedics said, confused. Callum's voice was calm, steady, unmistakable. "My wife is not pregnant. Test her, right now." Saffron's face shifted, just for a second. Panic flickered across her features before she caught herself. She forced a weak smile. "Callum, darling, you're confused." "The trauma." "I'm not confused," Callum said. "Test her." The senior paramedic hesitated, looking between them. "Sir, if she says she's pregnant, she's lying," Callum said firmly, "and I can prove it." He pulled out his phone and held up the photos he'd taken of the medical documents from the boathouse. The paramedic's eyes scanned the screen. His expression changed. "Get a pregnancy test," he said quietly to his partner. "Now." Saffron sat up straighter, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. I don't need to prove anything to—" "You do, if you're claiming a medical emergency," the paramedic said. "It's protocol." Saffron's jaw tightened. For the first time, her mask cracked. Not completely, but enough. The test came back in less than 5 minutes. Negative. The word dropped like a bomb. The senior paramedic looked at Saffron, his face carefully neutral. "Ma'am, the test is negative. You're not pregnant." The reporters went wild. Cameras flashed. Questions erupted. Chaos exploded across the harbor. Saffron stared at the paramedic, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find words. Then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a sharp, bitter sound. "Of course it's negative," she said, her voice suddenly cold and clear. "Because the baby isn't mine." She pointed at McKenna. "It's hers." The crowd went silent again. Every eye turned to McKenna. She stood frozen, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Saffron's smile was sharp now. Vicious. "She's the surrogate," Saffron said smoothly. "We hired her months ago. She signed the contracts. Everything was legal." Whispers rippled through the crowd. McKenna felt the weight of 100 eyes on her, judging, questioning, assuming. Callum stepped beside her. "That's not the whole truth." Saffron's eyes flashed. "Stay out of this, Callum." "She didn't know what she was signing," Callum said loudly, his voice carrying across the harbor. "You tricked her, used her, turned her body into part of your lie." Saffron's face twisted. "I secured our future." "You committed fraud," Callum said. "Possibly kidnapping, definitely assault." The crowd erupted again. Saffron's mask finally shattered completely. Her face went from victim to villain in seconds. "You have no idea what you're doing," she hissed at Callum. "You're destroying everything we built." "You destroyed it," Callum said quietly, "the moment you decided control was more important than truth." Saffron looked around wildly, realizing for the first time that she was losing. The reporters weren't looking at her with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with suspicion, and the story was no longer hers to control. A police officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. We have some questions." Saffron's eyes went wide. "Questions? I'm the victim here." "That's what we need to determine," the officer said calmly. Saffron looked at Callum, then at McKenna, and for the first time, real fear crossed her face. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice shaking now. "Both of you." Callum didn't respond. McKenna just stared at her, and Saffron realized what she'd lost. Not wealth, not status, control. The one thing she'd spent her entire life building. Gone. As the police led her away, Saffron turned back one last time. Her eyes locked on McKenna, and she mouthed two words: "This isn't over." McKenna's blood ran cold, because even now, even after everything, Saffron still believed she could win, still believed she could twist the narrative, still believed that truth was just another story waiting to be rewritten. The cameras kept flashing, the reporters kept shouting, and McKenna stood there, wrapped in a blanket, her hand pressed protectively against her stomach. She'd survived the ocean, survived Saffron's plan. But the real battle was just beginning, because when the world starts watching, truth and lies look exactly the same, and only one of them gets to survive. The truth didn't leak, it exploded. Within 24 hours, the story was everywhere. Headlines screamed. Across every screen, every newspaper, every social media feed. Billionaire wife faked pregnancy. Using unwitting surrogate. Saffron Voss charged with fraud, assault, attempted murder. The lie that almost drowned the truth. The world couldn't look away. Videos from the harbor went viral. Saffron being led away by police. Callum's voice cutting through the chaos. "She isn't pregnant." McKenna standing silent, wrapped in a blanket, her face a mixture of shock and exhaustion. Everyone had an opinion. Some called Saffron a monster, others called her a woman pushed to extremes by desperation, but no one could deny the evidence. Medical records surfaced, consent forms McKenna had signed without understanding, fertility clinic documents showing the embryo transfer, text messages between Saffron and her media advisor planning the pregnancy reveal, contracts with photographers, staged doctor visits, pills to fake morning sickness symptoms. Every detail painted the same picture: control, manipulation, deception, and attempted murder to protect it all. The charges came fast. Fraud, medical assault, kidnapping, conspiracy. And when investigators confirmed the boat had been sabotaged, a valve deliberately opened to flood the cabin, attempted murder. Saffron's lawyers tried to spin it, called it a misunderstanding, a desperate woman trying to save her marriage, a surrogate who didn't read the fine print. But the evidence was too strong, and Callum refused to help her. He stood in front of cameras 3 days after the rescue, his face gaunt, his voice steady. "I will not spin this," he said. "I will not protect a lie. My wife committed crimes, and I allowed it by choosing comfort over truth." The reporters shouted questions. Callum ignored them all. "I'm stepping down from my position effective immediately," he continued. "I take full responsibility for not seeing what was happening in my own house, for not protecting someone who deserved protection." He paused, his eyes finding the camera. "McKenna Jerry is the real victim here, and I failed her." The clip played on repeat for days. Some praised him for his honesty. Others called him a coward for not seeing it sooner. But he didn't care. He'd spent his whole life managing image. And he was done. McKenna watched it all from a hospital room. Doctors had confirmed it quietly, their faces careful and professional. She was pregnant. 12 weeks. The baby growing inside her wasn't Saffron's plan anymore. It was hers, her choice, her body, her future. The realization hit her in waves: terror, confusion, anger, but also something else: hope. She pressed a hand to her stomach, tears streaming down her face. This child had survived a storm, a lie, an attempt on both their lives, and so had she. The hardest truths are the ones we're afraid to say out loud. Don't stay silent. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Callum stepped inside, hesitant, holding a small bag. "I brought you some things," he said quietly. "Clothes, toiletries. I didn't know what you'd need." McKenna looked at him. He looked older, tired. Like a man who'd been carrying weight for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. "Thank you," she said. Callum set the bag down and stood there awkwardly, like he didn't know what to do with his hands. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "For everything. For not seeing. For not protecting you." McKenna's voice was quiet. "You saved my life." "I endangered it first," Callum said, "by allowing her into our lives. By trusting her when I shouldn't have." "You didn't know." "I should have." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Callum spoke again, his voice breaking slightly. "What are you going to do? About the baby?" McKenna's hand moved to her stomach instinctively. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but it's my choice now, not hers." Callum nodded. "Whatever you decide, I'll make sure you have everything you need: money, legal support, a safe place to live." McKenna looked at him carefully. "Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Callum said simply. "And because I owe you more than I can ever repay." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "You deserved better than this," he said. "And I'm going to make sure the world knows that." He left before she could respond. McKenna sat alone in the quiet hospital room, her mind racing. The future was terrifying. She was pregnant. Alone. In a country that still felt foreign. But she was alive. And for the first time in months, she had control over her own story. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. 3 words. "You took everything." McKenna's blood ran cold. Saffron. Even from jail, even facing years in prison, she was still trying to control the narrative. Still trying to make McKenna afraid. But this time, it didn't work. McKenna deleted the message, blocked the number, and made a decision. She wasn't going to hide anymore, wasn't going to stay silent, wasn't going to let fear win. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd been avoiding. A reporter, one who'd been asking for her story since the beginning. The line connected. "This is McCain and Jerry," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm ready to tell you everything." McKenna never went back to the Voss estate, not even to pack. She sent someone else. A lawyer Callum had hired to help her. Someone who understood that walking back into that house would feel like drowning all over again. They brought her things to a small apartment across the city. 1 bedroom. A kitchen with a window. Hardwood floors that creaked when she walked. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The first morning, McKenna woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains. Real sunlight. Not filtered through expensive drapes or tinted windows designed to protect furniture from fading. Just light. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not from sadness, from relief. For the first time in months, the silence around her didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. She made tea in her own kitchen, sat at a small table she'd bought secondhand, watched people walk by on the street below. Normal people, living normal lives. And she realized something. She wanted that. Not wealth, Not status. Not a house that looked like a museum. Just a life that belonged to her. 3 weeks later, there was a knock on her door. McKenna hesitated. She'd been careful. Changed her number. Stayed off social media, avoided cameras. She looked through the peephole. Callum. Her heart sank. She opened the door slowly, keeping the chain on. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quickly, reading her face. "I just wanted to see if you were okay." McKenna studied him. He looked different. Thinner. His hair was longer, less polished. He wore jeans and a plain shirt instead of the expensive suits she'd always seen him in. He looked human. She unlatched the chain and opened the door. "Come in," she said quietly. Callum stepped inside, his eyes scanning the small apartment. He didn't comment on the size, didn't compare it to what he was used to. He just nodded. "It's nice." McKenna closed the door. "What do you want, Callum?" He turned to face her, his hands in his pockets, his expression serious. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I don't deserve it." McKenna waited. "I'm here to ask for accountability," he continued, "to make sure you have everything you need. Legally, financially, emotionally. I don't want your money," McKenna said. "It's not about what you want," Callum said gently. "It's about what you're owed, for what happened to you, for what I allowed to happen." McKenna's throat tightened. "I've set up a trust," Callum continued. "For you and the baby. It's yours. No strings, no conditions. I don't need—" "Yes, you do," Callum said firmly. "You deserve security. You deserve a future that isn't built on survival." McKenna looked away, her eyes stinging. She wanted to refuse. Wanted to prove she could do this on her own. But the truth was, she was scared. Scared of being alone. Scared of raising a child in a world that had already tried to destroy her. Scared of the future. "Thank you," she said quietly. Callum nodded. "I also wanted to tell you that Saffron's trial is set for next month." McKenna's chest tightened. "I know. You don't have to testify if you don't want to," Callum said. "The evidence is strong enough without it." McKenna looked at him. "Do you want me to?" Callum was quiet for a moment. "I want you to do whatever feels right for you," he said finally. "Not for me. Not for justice. For you." McKenna's voice was barely a whisper. "What if I don't know what that is?" "Then take your time," Callum said. "There's no rush." They stood in silence for a moment. Then McKenna said the words she'd been holding on to since the night in the ocean. "My life is mine now." Callum's eyes softened. "Yes, it is." He turned toward the door. "If you need anything," he said, "call me. Any time." McKenna nodded. Callum paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry it took almost losing you for me to see that." He left. McKenna stood alone in her small apartment, the door closing softly behind him. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting. The sky was painted orange and pink. And for the first time in her life, McKenna felt something she'd never felt before. Hope. Not the fragile kind that breaks easily. The kind built on survival, on truth, on choosing herself when the world told her not to. She pressed a hand to her stomach. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, and she believed it. But that night, as she was getting ready for bed, her phone buzzed, an email, from an address she didn't recognize. Subject line, "You should see this." McKenna's stomach twisted. She opened it. Inside was a link to a video and a message. "Some truths are more dangerous than lies. Watch carefully." McKenna's hands trembled as she clicked the link. The video loaded. It was footage from the night of the boat, but not from the rescue. From before. Security camera footage from the harbor, showing Saffron, alone, at the boat, hours before they left, doing something to the engine. McKenna's blood ran cold, because the footage showed something no one had mentioned. Saffron wasn't alone. Someone was with her, helping her. And when the camera angle shifted, McKenna saw the face clearly. Her breath stopped. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone she knew. Someone who'd been in the house the whole time. Someone she'd trusted. The video ended, and McKenna sat frozen, her heart pounding, her mind racing. Because the conspiracy was bigger than Saffron, and it wasn't over. The courtroom was nothing like Saffron's world. No soft lighting, no carefully chosen angles, no audience she could charm. Just fluorescent lights, hard benches, and a judge who didn't care about her smile. Saffron sat at the defense table in a beige pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back simply. No makeup artist had touched her face that morning. She looked ordinary, and she hated it. McKenna sat in the gallery, her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding. She'd decided to come, not to testify. The prosecutors had enough evidence without her, but to watch, to see the woman who'd stolen her choice finally face consequences. The prosecutor stood, her voice clear and unwavering. The evidence will show that Saffron Voss engaged in a calculated, sustained campaign of fraud, medical assault, and attempted murder. She manipulated medical professionals, she deceived her husband, and she violated McKenna and Jerry's body and autonomy for personal gain. Saffron's lawyer objected, called it dramatic, exaggerated. But then the evidence came. Medical records, consent forms signed under false pretenses, text messages between Saffron and her media advisor planning every detail of the fake pregnancy, security footage from the fertility clinic showing Saffron coaching McKenna through appointments she didn't understand, financial records proving Saffron had paid off doctors to falsify documents, and the boat. The forensic report was devastating. The valve had been manually opened, deliberately, from inside the cabin, and Saffron's fingerprints were all over it. Her lawyer tried to spin it, called it an accident, a malfunction, a desperate woman trying to survive. But the jury wasn't buying it. McKenna watched Saffron's face throughout the trial. At first she maintained her composure, sat straight, looked dignified. But as the evidence mounted, something changed. The mask started to crack. Not all at once, slowly, like watching ice break apart under pressure. When Callum took the stand, Saffron's composure shattered completely. "Did you know about the surrogacy arrangement?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Callum said, his voice steady. "I believed my wife was pregnant. She lied to me for months. And when did you discover the truth? The night she tried to kill us." Saffron's lawyer objected again. The judge sustained it. But the damage was done. The jury had seen Callum's face, heard the pain in his voice, and they believed him. When it was Saffron's turn to testify, she tried to perform, tried to play the victim, the misunderstood wife, the desperate woman who just wanted a family. But the prosecutor dismantled her piece by piece. "Ms. Voss, did you inform McKenna and Jerry that she was being implanted with an embryo?" "Oi." She signed the consent forms. "That's not what I asked. Did you explain what those forms meant?" Saffron hesitated. "I assumed she understood." "Did you explain?" "No." "Did you tell your husband the truth about the pregnancy?" Not immediately." "Did you sabotage the boat?" "No." "Then why are your fingerprints on the valve that was opened?" Silence. Saffron's lawyer called for a recess. But it was too late. The truth was out, and this time Saffron couldn't control it. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just truth finally being heard. Share if you agree. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty on all counts: fraud, medical assault, conspiracy, attempted murder. Saffron's face went white, her hands trembled, and for the first time since McKenna had known her, Saffron cried. Not beautifully, not strategically, ugly, real, desperate. Too late. The judge didn't raise his voice when he spoke. He didn't need to. Ms. Voss, you treated another human being as a tool. You violated her body, her trust, and her autonomy. You endangered lives to protect a lie, and when confronted, you attempted murder. Saffron sobbed. The judge continued. You will serve 15 years in prison, no parole for the first 7. Saffron's legs buckled. Her lawyer caught her. The courtroom erupted in whispers. McKenna sat perfectly still, tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness, from release. It was over. Saffron was led away in handcuffs, still crying, still trying to speak, still trying to explain. But no one was listening anymore. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. McKenna stood on the steps, Callum beside her, his hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support, not possession. How do you feel? A reporter shouted. McKenna looked directly into the camera. I feel seen, she said simply. For the first time. The questions continued, but McKenna turned and walked away. She didn't owe them her story. She'd already told the truth. And that was enough. That night, McKenna sat in her apartment, her hand resting on her stomach. The baby moved, just a flutter. Small. Real. Hers. She smiled. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel terrifying. It felt possible. But then her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Her smile faded. She opened it. One sentence. Saffron wasn't the only one who wanted you gone. McKenna's blood ran cold. She stared at the message, her heart racing. The person in the security footage, the one helping Saffron at the boat, they were still out there, still watching, still waiting, and they weren't done. McKenna locked her door, checked the windows. Her hands were shaking because she realized something terrifying. Saffron going to prison didn't end the conspiracy, it just exposed it. And now, whoever had been helping her knew McKenna was the threat. Another message came through. Sleep well, McKenna. She dropped the phone, grabbed her keys, and ran. The pain came in waves, sharp, consuming, relentless. McKenna gripped the hospital bed rail, her breathing ragged, her body drenched in sweat. You're almost there, the nurse said calmly. One more push. McKenna couldn't speak, couldn't think. She just pushed. And then, suddenly, the pressure released. A cry filled the room. Small, strong, real. The nurse lifted the baby, and McKenna's entire world stopped. It's a boy, the nurse said, smiling. McKenna's hands trembled as they placed him on her chest. He was warm, tiny, perfect. His eyes were closed, his fists curled tight, his cry fading into soft whimpers as he felt her heartbeat. McKenna looked down at him, tears streaming freely down her face. No cameras, no performance, no lies, just life, raw, beautiful, hers. Hi, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm your mom. The baby quieted at her voice, and McKenna felt something she'd never felt before. Complete. Not because someone else said she was, not because a plan had worked out, but because she'd survived, she'd fought, she'd chosen, and this child, her son, was proof. The nurse stepped back, giving them space. McKenna held him close, memorizing every detail, his tiny fingers, the soft curve of his cheek, the way he fit perfectly in her arms. You're safe now, she whispered. I promise. No one will ever use you. No one will ever control you. She kissed his forehead gently. You're mine, and I'm yours. Hours later, after the baby had been cleaned and checked and wrapped in a soft blanket, McKenna sat alone in the quiet hospital room. The baby slept in her arms, his breathing steady and peaceful. She couldn't stop looking at him, couldn't stop marveling at the fact that he was real, that they'd both survived. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. A nurse peeked in. There's someone outside asking about you. Says his name is Callum Voss. McKenna's chest tightened. Tell him I'm resting, she said quietly. The nurse nodded and left. McKenna looked down at her son. She didn't owe Callum anything. Not her time. Not her gratitude. Not her story. He'd helped her. Supported her. Made sure she had what she needed. But this moment? This was hers alone. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. A text from Callum. "I just wanted to make sure you and the baby are safe. You don't have to reply, I understand. I'm glad you're both okay." McKenna read it twice. Then she set the phone down without responding. She didn't need to, because for the first time in her life, she didn't need anyone's permission to exist. She didn't need validation, didn't need approval. She just needed this, her son, her peace, her life. Outside the hospital, Callum sat in his car, staring at his phone. No reply. He hadn't expected one. He set the phone down and looked up at the hospital window. He couldn't see her, didn't know which room she was in, but he knew she was there. Safe, strong, free, and that was enough. He started the car and drove away, not because he didn't care, but because caring sometimes meant letting go. Inside the hospital room, McKenna felt her son stir in her arms. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused, and new. They locked on hers. And in that moment, McKenna knew. This was what she'd been fighting for. Not survival, but this. A future that belonged to them. A life built on truth, not lies. A story that was finally, completely hers. She smiled, and for the first time in months, the weight lifted. The fear faded. The future felt possible. Peace began. But that night, as McKenna drifted off to sleep with her son in the bassinet beside her, a nurse entered the room quietly. Too quietly. McKenna's eyes opened slightly, her instincts screaming. The nurse approached the bassinet. McKenna sat up instantly. "What are you doing?" The nurse turned. Her face was unfamiliar, cold. "Just checking on the baby," she said smoothly. But her hand was too close to the bassinet. Too deliberate. McKenna's heart raced. "I didn't call for anyone." The nurse smiled. Standard procedure. But her eyes told a different story. McKenna lunged forward, grabbing her son from the bassinet, her body shielding him. "Get out," McKenna said, her voice shaking but firm. The nurse didn't move. "You should have stayed quiet, McKenna," she said softly. "Some secrets are worth more than you know." McKenna's blood ran cold. Before she could scream, the nurse turned and walked out. Calmly, casually, like nothing had happened. McKenna sat, frozen, her son clutched to her chest, her mind racing. The person in the security footage, the one who'd helped Saffron, they weren't done. And now they knew where she was. McKenna pressed the call button frantically. A real nurse rushed in. "Is everything okay?" McKenna's voice was barely a whisper. "Someone was just in here. A woman. I don't know who she was." The nurse frowned. "We'll check security, but there's no one assigned to your room right now." McKenna's hands shook, because she knew. The conspiracy wasn't over. It had just found her again. And this time they weren't targeting her. They were targeting her son. 6 months after the trial, Callum Voss disappeared from public life. Not dramatically, not with scandal, he just stopped. Stopped attending galas, stopped doing interviews, stopped pretending the life he'd built meant anything. He sold the estate, donated most of his wealth, kept enough to live. Simply, and for the first time in his life, he slept through the night. People called him broken, defeated, a man who'd lost everything. But Callum didn't feel lost. He felt found, because he'd traded wealth for honesty, image for integrity, control for peace. And when he looked in the mirror now, he didn't flinch. He'd lost influence, lost reputation, lost the life everyone envied. But he'd gained something rarer, the ability to live with himself. McKenna's life looked different too. She lived in a small house now, nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a backyard, and windows that let in real light. Her son, David, was walking now, stumbling, more than walking, really, but every wobbly step felt like a miracle. She worked from home, freelance editing, quiet work that let her build her own schedule, her own boundaries, her own life. People asked her sometimes why she didn't sell her story. Publishers had offered money. Producers wanted to make a documentary. Reporters still called occasionally, hoping she'd changed her mind. But McKenna always said the same thing. Some truths are for healing, not performance. She didn't need the world to know her story. She just needed to survive it. And she had. One afternoon, a journalist showed up at her door. Young, eager, holding a recorder and a notebook. "Ms. Njeri, I'm writing a piece about women who've survived exploitation," she said. "Your story could help so many people." McKenna stood in the doorway, David balanced on her hip. "My story already helped someone," she said quietly. "Me." The journalist pressed. "But don't you want justice? Don't you want people to know what happened?" McKenna smiled softly. "Justice already happened. Saffron is in prison. I'm free. That's enough." "But what about the public? Don't they deserve—" "The public doesn't own my pain," McKenna said gently but firmly. "I do." The journalist hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I understand," she said, and she left. McKenna closed the door and looked down at David. He was smiling up at her, his tiny hand gripping her shirt. "Mama," he said. The word still made her cry sometimes, not from sadness, from gratitude, because she was here. He was here. They were safe, and that was everything. The storm had taken so much from her trust, her innocence, her belief that hard work and silence would keep her safe. But it had also given her something. Proof. Proof that she was stronger than she knew. Proof that truth could survive lies. Proof that she didn't need permission to exist. The storm lived inside her now, not as trauma, as evidence of survival, of strength, of choice. And she carried it quietly. That night, after David was asleep, McKenna sat on her porch with a cup of tea. The sky was clear. Stars scattered across the darkness like tiny promises. She thought about Callum sometimes, wondered if he was okay, if he'd found peace. She hoped he had, not because she owed him anything, but because she knew what it felt like to carry weight you couldn't put down, and she hoped he'd found a way to let it go. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. McKenna's heart stopped. She'd changed her number 3 times, been careful, stayed off social media, kept her address private. But somehow they still found her. She opened the message. "You can't hide forever, McKenna. We're closer than you think." Her hands trembled. She looked around the quiet street. Dark houses, empty sidewalks, nothing. But she felt it. The presence, the threat, the conspiracy that had never really ended. Another message came through. An image this time. McKenna's breath caught. It was a photo of her house, taken tonight, from across the street. Her blood ran cold. She stood quickly, locking the door, checking the windows, her heart racing. Someone was watching her. Right now. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, but before the call connected, the power cut. The entire house went dark. McKenna froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. David's monitor went silent. She ran to his room, her hands shaking, her breathing shallow. He was still there, still sleeping, still safe. She scooped him up, holding him close. Then she heard it, a sound downstairs, the soft creak of a floorboard. Someone was inside. McKenna's mind raced. No exits, no weapons, no help. Just her and David, and whoever had been helping Saffron all along. She backed into the corner of David's room, her hand over his mouth to keep him quiet. Footsteps climbed the stairs, slow, deliberate, getting closer. McKenna's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything she could use. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The handle turned, and McKenna realized with horror the storm wasn't over. It had just been waiting. The door opened. McKenna held David tighter, her body shielding his, her breath frozen in her chest. A figure stepped into the darkened room. Tall, silent, deliberate. McKenna's voice came out as a whisper. "Who are you?" The figure stopped. Then a voice she recognized spoke. "I'm someone who wanted to make sure you were safe." The lights flickered back on. Callum stood in the doorway, his hands raised, his face pale. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to scare you. The power cutting, that wasn't me. I just got here and saw someone running from your house." McKenna's legs nearly gave out. "What are you doing here?" she breathed. Callum pulled out his phone, showing her a message. "I got this an hour ago. A warning that someone was coming for you tonight." McKenna stared at the screen, her mind racing. "From who?" "I don't know," Callum said, "but I called the police. They're on their way." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. McKenna sank to the floor, still holding David, tears streaming down her face. Not from fear anymore, from exhaustion. Because she was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of living in the shadow of a conspiracy that refused to die. Callum knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "It's over, McKenna. Whoever was helping Saffron, they're gone. Now. The police will find them." McKenna looked at him through her tears. "How do you know it's over?" Callum's expression was grim. "Because I made sure of it." He pulled out another phone, showed her a video. Security footage from earlier that night. A woman approaching McKenna's house. The same woman from the hospital. But this time the police were waiting. They'd arrested her before she could get inside. McKenna's breath caught. "Who is she?" "Blythe," Callum said quietly. "Saffron's media advisor. She was part of it from the beginning." McKenna stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Blythe. The woman who'd helped craft the pregnancy narrative. Who'd sat at their dinner table. Who'd smiled while planning McKenna's destruction. "She wanted to finish what Saffron started," Callum continued. "But she's in custody now. It's over." McKenna closed her eyes, holding David close. It was over. Really over. The storm that had tried to drown her, in water, in lies, in fear, had finally passed, and she was still standing. The police arrived minutes later, took statements, promised protection, assured her she was safe now. Callum stayed until they left. Then he stood at the door, ready to go. "Thank you," McKenna said quietly. Callum nodded. "You don't owe me anything. You never did." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You survived something most people couldn't," he said. "Not just the ocean. Not just Saffron, but the lie itself." McKenna looked at him. "Some people drown in water," Callum said, "but more people drown in lies dressed up as love, as security, as belonging." He paused. "You chose truth, even when it cost you everything. And that's why you're still here." McKenna's throat tightened. Because he was right. She'd survived not because she was the strongest or the smartest or the luckiest, but because when the moment came, when power demanded her silence, she chose truth. And truth saved her. Callum left quietly, and McKenna sat alone in her living room, David asleep. In her arms, the house finally silent. She thought about everything she'd lost, her innocence, her trust, her belief that the world was fair. But she also thought about everything she'd gained, her voice, her agency, her son, herself. The storm had taken so much, but it had also revealed something she'd never known before. She was unbreakable, not because nothing could hurt her, but because even when everything tried to destroy her, she chose to survive. If this story moved you, drop "I choose truth" below. Subscribe for more stories about survival, choice, and dignity. McKenna stood and walked to the window. The street was quiet now, peaceful. She looked up at the stars, the same ones that had watched her almost drown. And she whispered into the night, "I choose truth." Not for anyone else, for herself, because the most dangerous storms aren't the ones that rage outside. They're the ones people pretend aren't real. The lies that wrap around you slowly until you can't breathe. The silence that suffocates. The control that kills. And surviving them changes everything. McKenna turned away from the window and looked at her son. He was safe. She was safe. And tomorrow they would wake up in a world where truth mattered more than performance, where dignity was worth more than approval, where survival was measured not by what you kept, but by what you refused to lose. Herself, her voice, her choice. The storm was over, but the strength it left behind, that would last forever. McKenna smiled, because she'd learned the final truth. Some people drown in water, others drown in lies, but the ones who survive, they're the ones who choose truth, every single time, no matter the cost. And that choice changes everything. The end.